Did you know that one of the most extraordinary encounters between heaven and earth took place in a forgotten corner of rural France? No grand cathedral, no royal witnesses, just a hidden grotto, a cold February morning, and a poor girl carrying nothing but faith. What began in silence would go on to stir the hearts of millions across the world. This is the story of the apparition of the Virgin Mary at Lourdes. Chapter 1. The Quiet Village. In the chill of February 1858, Lourdes was a forgotten town cradled between the slopes of the French Pyrenees. Its narrow, uneven roads wound through clusters of worn stone houses, their shutters rattling in the icy breeze. The land bore the weight of winter-bare trees, frozen soil, and a sky shrouded in a constant haze. Smoke curled from chimneys into the gray air as villagers huddled indoors, wrapped in wool and silence. Life here was marked by hardship and resignation. The people of Lourdes were poor, and they knew it. Among them lived a 14-year-old girl named Bernadette Suberus. She was neither clever nor robust, small for her age, thin, often wheezing with asthma. She had struggled to learn her catechism and had missed years of school due to illness. She couldn't read or write, and even among her classmates, she was seen as slow. Yet beneath her fragility was a quiet strength, an openness, a tenderness of spirit that set her apart. She was deeply devout, though not in a showy or scholarly way. Her faith lived in her actions, in her quiet prayers, in the way she treated others with gentleness and without judgment. Bernadette's family had once known modest stability. Her father, François, worked as a miller, but an accident and a failing economy had taken away their income. By the time Bernadette reached her teens, they had fallen so low that they were forced to move into Le Cachot, a former jail cell, damp and cramped, offered to them out of charity. The single room was dark and cold, its stone walls stained by years of neglect, its tiny window letting in more frost than light. Still, her parents did what they could. Her mother, Louise, worked long hours washing laundry. Her father took whatever odd jobs he could find. They shared what little they had: dry bread, onion soup, borrowed clothes, and carried their misfortunes with dignity. In this place of worn boots and empty bowls, Bernadette passed her days without bitterness. She helped with chores, fetched water, and tended to her younger siblings. She rarely complained, even when her chest tightened or her stomach grumbled. Others overlooked her, dismissed her as simple, too sickly to matter. But Bernadette noticed things others missed: the way sunlight touched the frost-covered grass, the silence of a chapel at dusk, the comfort in holding a rosary bead by bead. She lived on the edge of the town's attention, but never far from grace. In the shadow of a cold mountain town, wrapped in poverty and obscurity, Bernadette's story waited quiet, hidden, and ready to begin. Chapter 2. The First Encounter. It was a Thursday morning, the 11th of February. The sky hung low over Lourdes, heavy with damp clouds that threatened more cold. Bernadette had stayed home from school again, her asthma flaring in the bitter air. But there was still work to do, and her mother, despite her usual protectiveness, sent her out with her younger sister Toinette and their friend Jeanne Abadi to gather firewood. Fuel was scarce and precious in the heart of winter, and every dry stick mattered. The three girls made their way past the outskirts of town, down toward the river and beyond, to a rugged area known as Massabielle. It was a wild, unkempt patch of land where the river met rock and earth, and just beyond it lay an old limestone grotto. Locals rarely ventured there. The space was used more often by swineherds than by townsfolk, but to children looking for branches, it offered promise. When they reached the narrow canal that fed into the Gave de Pau, Toinette and Jean removed their shoes and waded across, squealing at the icy water. Bernadette hesitated. The cold would cut straight through her chest, and the last thing she needed was another coughing fit. She remained behind, standing still at the edge of the canal, clutching her skirts, trying to decide whether to risk it. And then something strange happened. A sudden rush of air swept through the trees. It sounded like wind, but nothing around her moved. Not a leaf stirred, not a branch bent. Bernadette turned her head slowly, her breath catching in her throat. Inside the shadowed niche of the grotto, a soft light had begun to glow, and in that light stood a woman. She was young, impossibly beautiful. Her figure clothed in a robe of pure white that shimmered without casting shadow. A blue sash draped down from her waist, and on each of her bare feet rested a golden rose. In her hands, she held a long, glistening rosary. Her face was peaceful and kind, her expression gentle beyond words. She looked directly at Bernadette, as though she had been waiting for her. Without knowing why, without fear or hesitation, Bernadette dropped to her knees. She fumbled for the rosary in her pocket and began to pray. Her fingers moved clumsily at first, but her voice steadied as the Hail Marys came. The lady remained silent, but with each prayer, her lips moved gently in rhythm, her eyes never leaving Bernadette's. There was no sound beyond the murmured words, no movement but the quiet touch of fingers on beads. When the last prayer faded, the woman smiled faintly and vanished. The light was gone. The grotto stood empty once more. Toinette and Jean had returned and found Bernadette still kneeling in the dirt, staring at the rock face. She told them what she had seen. They scoffed. There had been no one there, they insisted. No light, no woman, no sound of wind. But Bernadette's face was radiant, and still, her voice firm, her hands trembling slightly from something deeper than cold. She said nothing more, only that the lady had looked at her as no one ever had with love that needed no words. When the girls returned to town, word spread quickly. Some laughed, some whispered, others frowned. But none could ignore the calm in Bernadette's eyes, the quiet certainty in her voice. Something had happened at the grotto, something no one could explain, and something inside her had changed forever. Chapter 3. Growing Tension and Wonder. On the morning of February 14th, 3 days after the encounter in the grotto, Bernadette returned to Massabielle before sunrise. The sky was still bruised with night, and the earth beneath her shoes was stiff with frost. She brought with her a small vial of holy water, borrowed from the family altar. It was not defiance that made her bring it, nor superstition. It was trust, paired with caution. She wanted to be sure the radiant figure who had smiled upon her was from heaven, not something else. As she knelt and began to pray, the lady appeared again, bathed in the same soft brilliance as before. Bernadette sprinkled the holy water gently in the direction of the apparition. The lady only smiled wider. There was no trace of anger, no movement to retreat, only serenity. Bernadette was reassured. Whatever this presence was, it carried no malice. She came back the next day, and the next. Always the same hour, always the same humble attitude. The lady never failed to appear. She did not always speak, but her gestures were tender, her gaze steady. With each return, something in Bernadette deepened some invisible well of peace, some growing sense that she was part of something far greater than herself. It wasn't long before others began following her, first quietly, out of sight, then openly. And when the crowds began gathering in full, so did the voices of authority. Police officers approached her at the grotto and in her home. They asked pointed questions. What did she want? Who told her to say these things? Was she trying to cause unrest? Bernadette answered simply, directly, without embellishment. She never added a single flourish to her account. She described what she saw and left the rest in silence. The civil commissioner found her unsettling in her calmness, as if she were too composed for a peasant girl under pressure. That in itself made her more suspect. Some doctors were brought in, instructed to assess her mental state. They searched for symptoms, delusions, fevers, signs of religious hysteria, but found none. Bernadette was poor. Yes. Physically weak. Yes. But her mind was clear, her memory precise, and her answers unwavering. At the church, skepticism reigned. Father Dominique Peramel, a stern and educated priest with a sharp eye for nonsense, remained cautious. When Bernadette was brought to him, he listened without smiling. He questioned her thoroughly, particularly about the lady's silence. Why no name? Why no message for the church? When Bernadette offered no more than she'd already said, he dismissed her for the time being. If this lady has something to say, let her speak more clearly, he told her coldly. Meanwhile, the townspeople were caught in the swell between belief and doubt. Some began to pray at the grotto, even in Bernadette's absence. Others heckled her on the street or jeered from the crowd while she knelt. The growing attention turned Massabielle into a strange stage, part sanctuary, part spectacle. Arguments flared in cafes, behind closed doors, even at the dinner table. The town was no longer quiet. Bernadette remained curiously untouched by the drama surrounding her. She spoke to no one unless spoken to. She accepted no gifts. She rejected the offer of a new dress. When someone tried to lead her away from the crowd to safety, she chose to return alone the next day. As always, walking the same muddy road in her patched skirt and wooden shoes. The girl who had once faded into the background of Lourdes now stood at the center of something no one could fully explain. And yet, she had not changed. She still prayed in the same quiet voice. She still made the sign of the cross with slow reverence. She still claimed nothing for herself, not even understanding. The lady kept appearing. The crowds kept growing. And beneath it all, a question hung in the air, unanswered and unrelenting. Why her? Why now? Why here? Chapter 4. The Message, Penance, and Prayer. By the time Bernadette returned to the grotto for the 9th time, something in the lady's presence had changed. The same light remained, the same calm grace. Yet her gaze now carried purpose, a depth that pressed gently into Bernadette's soul. The silence between them was finally broken. The lady spoke simply, without grandeur or prophecy, with words that struck deeper than any sermon. Pray for sinners. Do penance. The words were few, yet heavy with meaning. Bernadette listened not as a child being instructed, but as a soul entrusted with something far greater than herself. She asked no questions. She offered no reply. She received the message as something not meant to be debated or explained, but lived in quiet obedience. From that moment, her visits to the grotto changed in tone. What had once drawn curiosity and wonder now demanded surrender. Bernadette understood that obedience itself was the offering. Without being asked, she began to fast. She walked barefoot along cold paths. She accepted discomfort without complaint, offering each small sacrifice with steady resolve. Then came the morning of February 25th. A damp fog hung over Massabielle, and the crowd was larger than usual. When the lady appeared, she gave a command that puzzled everyone who heard it. Go, drink from the spring, and wash yourself. Bernadette looked toward the rock wall. There was no spring, no trickle of water, only dry earth beneath the grotto. Without hesitation, she knelt and began to dig with her bare hands. Her fingers scraped into the soil as mud gathered beneath her nails. The crowd murmured. Some laughed nervously. Others watched in silence. Slowly, thick, muddy water pooled in the hollow. Bernadette cupped it in her hands, drank it, and smeared it across her face as instructed, without embarrassment or protest. To those watching, the scene seemed absurd. A girl crawling in dirt, drinking mud, covering herself in filth. Some turned away in disgust. Others whispered about madness. Yet by the following day, the place where she had dug was no longer dry. A thin stream of clear, cold water had begun to flow. The water did not proclaim itself as a miracle. It simply flowed. People came quietly, touched it, washed with it, and left changed in ways they struggled to explain. Some walked with new strength. Some breathed freely again. Crutches were left behind beside the rocks. No declarations were made, yet the stories multiplied. Soon, people arrived from beyond Lourdes. Some came seeking healing, others out of doubt, curiosity, or sorrow. They washed their wounds, filled bottles, lit candles, and wept beside the stones. Bernadette herself made no claims. She called it simply the Lady's Spring. The message remained unchanged: prayer, penance, humility. And through the obedience of a fragile girl in a worn shawl, water had broken from dry ground, offering not answers, but peace. Chapter 5. The Climax. I am the Immaculate Conception. By the time spring arrived, Bernadette's visits to the grotto had entered their second month. She had returned more than a dozen times, each appearance drawing larger crowds and deeper scrutiny. The authorities grew restless, while the church observed with cautious reserve. The lady continued to appear, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking only when necessary. Yet one question remained unanswered. No one knew her name. Speculation filled the air. Some whispered she was Saint Mary Magdalene. Others claimed she must be an angel. A few dared to say she was the Blessed Virgin, though Bernadette herself had never said so. She called the lady simply Aquero, that one. She had never presumed to ask who she was. Until the morning of March 25th, the Feast of the Annunciation, a date already marked by divine mystery. Before sunrise, Bernadette walked once more to the grotto. Frost clung to the grass, though signs of spring were beginning to stir. As she knelt in her usual place, the lady appeared, radiant as ever, standing above the hollow where the spring now flowed. Bernadette clasped her hands and, with a courage she had not known before, lifted her eyes and asked gently, "Madam, would you be so kind as to tell me your name?" The lady smiled but did not answer. Bernadette asked again and again. Only at the fourth request did the lady respond. She extended her arms, raised her eyes to heaven, and spoke slowly and clearly. "I am the Immaculate Conception." The words fell into the silence with solemn weight. Bernadette did not understand them. She had never learned such a phrase, nor could she grasp its meaning, but she knew it was sacred, and she repeated it softly, then aloud, over and over, so she would not forget. She rose and ran through the misty streets of Lourdes, skirt trailing, feet slipping in the mud, breath burning in her chest. She did not go home. She ran to the presbytery. Bursting into Father Paramel's office, she proclaimed the words exactly as she had heard them. "I am the Immaculate Conception." The priest froze. He knew the weight of the phrase. Only 4 years earlier, Pope Pius IX had proclaimed the dogma declaring that Mary was conceived without original sin, a truth few theologians fully grasped, let alone a poor, uneducated girl. The priest sat down in stunned silence. Everything shifted in that moment. The visions could no longer be dismissed as imagination or local legend. From that day, investigations took on a new tone, marked by reverence rather than doubt. The spring at Massabielle was treated as sacred, and Bernadette was no longer a curiosity, but a messenger. The lady had spoken her name, and with that name, prayer, penance, silence, and water were revealed as part of a single mystery bearing the weight of heaven. Chapter 6. Miracles and Mayhem. In the weeks that followed the revelation of the lady's name, Lourdes was swept into a rising tide of emotion. Faith, desperation, disbelief, and wonder collided without restraint. The spring at Massabielle, once a muddy hollow in the earth, now flowed steadily with cold, clear water. People arrived in growing numbers, some leaning on canes, others carried on stretchers, all drawn by the rumor that grace had emerged from stone. At first, reports of healing were whispered quietly among those who visited. Soon, they were repeated, then spoken aloud. A young boy with a crippled leg claimed he could walk again. A woman whose wound had remained open for years washed it in the spring, and within days it closed. A man nearly blind touched the water to his eyes and saw sunlight clearly, as if for the first time. Skeptics scoffed, but the stories continued to multiply. Each account drew more travelers, more curious onlookers, more faithful believers. Lourdes, once quiet and remote, filled with carts, horses, and the steady tread of pilgrims. They came by the dozens, then the hundreds, not only from nearby villages, but from Paris, Lyon, and even across the borders of Spain and Belgium. Pilgrims brought bottles, rags, and handkerchiefs to soak in the water and carry home. Many left their crutches leaning against the rocks, silent testimonies to hope fulfilled or renewed. Some departed healed in body, others left unchanged, yet strangely strengthened. All had knelt beside the same flowing spring. But with faith came frenzy, and with frenzy came fear. The growing crowds unsettled local authorities, who watched the movement with increasing unease. What had begun as prayer now appeared to them as something they could no longer control. The local government acted swiftly. Officials declared the grotto off-limits. A wooden barrier was built around the spring, and armed guards were stationed nearby. Access was restricted in the name of public safety, though few believed safety was the only concern. Rumors spread that the state feared a surge of uncontrollable religious hysteria. The restrictions failed. People came anyway, slipping past guards under the cover of night. They knelt before the stone niche and whispered prayer as candles flickered in the darkness. Along the riverbank, spontaneous processions formed, humble hymns rising into the air on cracked voices. The grotto had become a sanctuary, whether the authorities acknowledged it or not. The church, meanwhile, could no longer remain silent. Pressured by both devotion and doubt, the Bishop of Tarbes established an official commission of inquiry. Doctors, scientists, priests, and legal experts were assembled to investigate the events at Lourdes. Testimonies were gathered, medical records examined, witnesses questioned, and Bernadette closely observed. What they found was not spectacle, but constancy. Bernadette remained exactly as she had always been. She showed no interest in the crowds and took no pride in stories of healing. She did not touch pilgrims or interpret their experiences. She never declared the spring miraculous. She simply knelt, prayed, and returned to silence. At home, her life changed little. She still fetched water, cared for her siblings, and moved with the quiet humility of someone expecting no reward. While miracles were proclaimed and accusations hurled, Bernadette stayed anchored and unshaken. The mayhem swirled, the stories spread, yet she remained where she had always been. Not at the center of glory, but at the feet of something divine. Chapter 7. Bernadette's later years. As the crowds in Lourdes continued to swell, and the grotto became a place of pilgrimage, Bernadette quietly withdrew from the center of attention. She never returned to the spring she had uncovered, never spoke at processions, and never stood beside church dignitaries. While the world gathered around Massabielle, she chose disappearance over recognition, silence over acclaim. In 1866, at the age of 22, she left her hometown and traveled hundreds of kilometers to Nevers. There, she entered the convent of St. Gildard and became a novice with the Sisters of Charity, an order dedicated to serving the poor and the sick. The girl known across France for visions arrived without ceremony, seeking not honor, but obscurity. She came dressed in plain clothing, holding the same rosary she had prayed with at Lourdes. The sisters welcomed her kindly, though many regarded her with quiet reverence. Yet, Bernadette resisted every attempt to treat her as someone extraordinary. When asked why she had come, she answered simply, "I have come to hide myself." Convent life was demanding, marked by early prayers, manual labor, and long hours of silence. Bernadette embraced the discipline without complaint. Assigned to the infirmary, she cared for the sick and elderly with tenderness shaped by her own suffering. Though poorly educated, she carried out her duties faithfully, scrubbing floors, folding linens, and whispering prayers for the dying. Her fame followed her nonetheless. Visitors came hoping to see her. Journalists wrote about her. Clergy sent letters filled with questions. Some sought confirmation, others contradiction. Bernadette spoke only when instructed by her superiors, and even then, she never altered her story. She added nothing, explained nothing, and never sought to persuade. She once described herself with disarming humility. "All I am," she said, "is the broom the Virgin used, and then put back behind the door." She understood her role as something brief and hidden, a tool returned quietly to its place once the work was done. As the years passed, her fragile health deteriorated. She suffered from tuberculosis of the bone, a painful disease that twisted her spine and invaded her lungs. Confined increasingly to her bed, she endured constant pain and fever. She never asked for pity, offering each moment of suffering to God in silence. When others wept at her condition, she reminded them that she was nothing and that Our Lady had chosen her because she was the most ignorant. In the spring of 1879, knowing her end was near, Bernadette received the last sacraments and held her crucifix tightly. Her final words were a prayer whispered with trust. "Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for me, a poor sinner." She died at 35. Buried quietly at Nevers, her story did not end in death. She had seen the Lady, obeyed her call, and returned to the shadows. And in that humility, she became a light that would never fade. Chapter 8. The Legacy of Lourdes. In the decades following Bernadette's death, Lourdes changed forever. What had once been a quiet mountain town slowly became a spiritual heartland for millions. The muddy grotto beside the river, hidden and overlooked, grew into one of the most visited pilgrimage sites in the world, a place where suffering, faith, and hope meet beneath the open sky. Around the grotto rose the sanctuary of Our Lady of Lourdes, carefully preserving the place where the Lady had appeared. Pilgrims now approach along wide esplanades lined with chapels, churches, and shaded paths. Yet at the center remains the same rock, the hollow where Bernadette once knelt, unchanged in form but surrounded by candles, whispered prayers, and deep reverence. Each year, millions arrive from every corner of the globe. Some come in wheelchairs or on stretchers, guided by volunteers dressed in blue and white. Many are gravely ill or wounded. Others are caregivers, seekers, or believers who simply long to stand where heaven once seemed to touch the earth. The spring, uncovered by Bernadette, continues to flow. Its waters feed the baths where pilgrims immerse themselves in the cold silence. Some emerge in tears, others in quiet joy. Not all leave physically healed, but nearly all leave changed, carrying something inward that cannot be measured. Amid this devotion, the Church has exercised careful oversight. In 1883, it established the Lourdes Medical Bureau, a permanent commission of physicians tasked with examining claims of healing. Each case must meet strict criteria. The illness must be documented, incurable by medicine, and its disappearance sudden, complete, and lasting. More than 70 healings have been officially recognized as miraculous, while countless others remain testimonies known only to God. Yet Lourdes is marked by more than physical cures. Many speak of deeper healing, of faith restored, purpose renewed, and peace rediscovered. Each day, processions move through the sanctuary. The Eucharistic procession passes solemnly among the sick, and at night, candlelight fills the grounds as voices from many languages rise together in prayer. In 1933, the Church affirmed what the faithful had long believed. Bernadette Soubirous was canonized as a saint. Pope Pius XI held her up as a model of humility, obedience, and purity of heart. Her feast is celebrated each year on April 16th, the day of her death. Her image now stands across the world, but none is more moving than the statue near the grotto, showing a young girl kneeling, rosary in hand, gaze lifted in trust. Today, Lourdes is more than a destination. It is a sign of mercy in a wounded world. It reminds the forgotten that they are seen, assures the suffering that they are not alone, and proclaims that grace chooses the humble over the powerful. What began with a poor girl's prayer in the cold continues to echo through every footstep, every candle, and every whispered plea, carrying the lady's enduring invitation to prayer, penance, and mercy. Chapter 9. Closing Reflection. She came without noise, without power, without threat. She came not to rule, but to remind. In the silence of a rocky grotto, the Queen of Heaven bent down to earth, not to demand glory, but to offer mercy. She stood barefoot on stone, clothed in white, crowned only with light. Her presence was not to be explained, it was to be received. To a world that had grown cold and distracted, she offered something gentle, something clear, a return to what mattered most. She chose a child to carry her message, not because the child was wise, but because she was willing. Through Bernadette, Mary spoke not in sermons, but in simplicity. Her words were few, but each one burned with eternal love. She asked for prayer not out of need, but as a bridge. She asked for penance not as punishment, but as healing. She called herself the Immaculate Conception, not to dazzle theology, but to show that grace is real, and it begins at the very root of being. Mary did not promise relief from suffering. She promised the presence of love in the midst of it. She did not erase pain, she transformed it. At Lourdes, she opened a spring not only of water, but of compassion. And that spring has never run dry. She still comes not in visions for all to see, but in whispers to the heart. She still waits not in palaces, but wherever there is faith, however small. She still calls not just to Bernadette, but to every soul, come back to God. Come with your wounds. Come with your doubt. Come, and let grace begin again.